Hello. I'm continuing to drive in eastern North Dakota. I swear nice scenery is coming, but you're going to have to put up with a little more flat prairie for a little bit longer. But that's okay. I don't want distraction from my topic. I will just note that my video description with all the links this time got too long for the video description. So there is a link to an Evernote page in the video description where my links are, and you'll find sort of my script. So let's dive into it. In the last video, I spent a lot of time talking about a possible book ban that could happen in North Dakota, depending on how irrational our legislature is feeling. One thing I didn't talk about is that my nearest city, Dickinson, North Dakota, which has a population of about 25,000 people, recently faced quite a lot of controversy over the book Let's Talk About It, A Teen's Guide to Sex, Relationships, and Being a Human. 90 people showed up at the library board meeting. One father at the meeting rejected the notion that parents should be expected to vigilantly monitor their child for the entirety of the time they're in the library. In his words, "This is vile, vulgar, and completely unnecessary. I'm not following my daughters around in the library and looking at what they're doing. They're free to explore the information that's there. Isn't that kind of the essence of having library to begin with? That you're safe to come and figure out stuff about the world, to learn, etc." Almost seems like he's on my side. But this is a man who said this wants to ban books. I wish it was just North Dakota. Michigan Republican gubernatorial candidate Tudor Dixon proposed banning books featuring divorced parents. The article noting this also notes that books aren't just about our direct experience, they expand our horizons and help us learn about the larger world. See, I don't have divorced parents, so one way I can learn to understand what it's like to have a divorced parent is by reading. When I was in second grade, my father started reading The Lord of the Rings to my brother and I. When Gandalf got yanked over the bridge by the Balrog, kind of a important moment, my father left for a long meeting. So my mother tried to continue reading it to us, but she didn't do it right. And didn't do it fast enough because I wanted to find out about Gandalf. So I started reading the thing on my own. She later told me that she wondered what an 8-year-old boy made out of such unfamiliar things like volcanoes that were in the book. But truthfully, I think the larger point of reading those books would have been expanding that 8-year-old's world. Books do that. I've known my sexual orientation since elementary school. Books about gay or straight characters didn't change that. My gender has always been secure, no matter what I read. Maybe these people are more afraid that I'll become empathetic to those who are different from me. So I opened the first video with a librarian from the Patmos Library in Jamestown Township in Michigan. Voters there rejected the millage to support the library, gutting 84% of its funding. And I'll circle back to this a little bit later. As a result, it's likely going to close by 2024. This is due to books like Genderqueer, a memoir, which is about the author's coming of age as non-binary. Never mind that some patrons may be non-binary, or they may be binary and want to understand their non-binary friends. Library director Amber McLean resigned in spring 2022, and interim director Matthew Lawrence resigned later. But library staff and board of directors refused to remove this and other books. Opponents organized in an effort opposing a library that, quote, promoted the LGBTQ ideology. One resident had a sign saying, 50% increase to groom our kids? Vote no on library. Salem Tousley, a non-binary resident, said, "When I was growing up in Jenison, the language of who I was as a non-binary person didn't exist yet. When I read Genderqueer, it was the first time I ever saw myself represented in a book. So many kids are struggling in silence, especially in areas like this. Having access to resources and materials of people who are sharing your experience is literally life-saving. It's worth noting that they identified as non-binary before reading these books. An organizer for the conservative group commented that they are trying to groom our children to believe it's okay to have these sinful desires. It's not a political issue, it's a biblical issue. Of the 67,000 book collection, 90 have an LGBTQ theme. For those of you into statistics, that's, like 0.1%. Libraries are facing bomb threats over books. Are ideas that threatening? Some, like one faced in Nashville, Tennessee, actually came from outside the area. Right-wing groups are focusing their ire on libraries for hosting events and books with LGBTQ and racial justice themes. Some are protests of drag queen story hours, which no child is forced to attend. But apparently, if you don't choose to raise your child right, these people will choose how to raise them for you, with threats and so on. Attempts to ban books are accelerating. There were more in 2022 than in 2021. And it's infecting schools, the institutions we entrust with teaching the next generation, instilling them with knowledge and teaching them to think critically. On September 19th, 2022, the Cabarrus County School Board of North Carolina ordered its teenaged student interns to leave a public meeting before a board member read an oral sex scene aloud from John Green's 2005 Looking for Alaska, an award-winning teen novel. I guess they don't know that teens know about sex? So, maybe the teens caught it on their cell phones. It was all broadcast on the district's YouTube channel. It's even on the district website, so it was all just theater. According to the author, the book isn't about sex, which is why there's so little sex in it. It is about grief and failing those we claim to love, and it's about radical hope and forgiveness. And the author did note the amount of sexually explicit passages in the Bible. The author went on to note that text is meaningless without context. He notes that the book is arguing, somewhat old-fashionedly, against emotionally disconnected sexual experiences, not for them. Like, if you find the book arousing, I really think you are reading it wrong. And yes, the school board does have a policy on removing books, and they aren't following it. You may well argue that the people with money can still buy these books, but Republican Virginia delegates attempted to block Barnes & Noble from selling the books Genderqueer and A Court of Mist and Fury. Fortunately, the courts recognized a First Amendment issue. A national ranking of states engaged in book banning surprised me. I'm from Pennsylvania. That state was third on the list, far above my new state of North Dakota. I think one thing that protects North Dakota is that Governor Doug Burgum isn't trying to make a name for himself with the crazy wing of the right. South Dakota isn't so safe, but neither Dakota is as well known as Florida and Texas for book banning. And like South Dakota, they each have a governor trying to gain national fame. I expect that in North Dakota, the rational side is going to win on books. This state is right-wing, but usually manages to avoid the extremes. But as of June 2022, Texas managed to ban over 700 different books. One Texas lawmaker managed to target 850 books. Now, as I discussed in the last video, some lawmakers do want to bring this to North Dakota, and this state has seen the dubious joys of book banning before. So, one of these days, And it's not really on the way to anywhere, but one of these days I want to visit Drake, North Dakota this summer. Because in 1973, English teacher Bruce Severy assigned his students to read Slaughterhouse-Five and Deliverance. Severy was a new English teacher. He thought these books would resonate with his students. One student didn't like the books and complained to her mother, who then complained to the school board. The school board president had the last name McCarthy, which, was fun for the media. The board ended up burning these two books, confiscating them from lockers and so on, as well as an additional anthology that contained stories by Hemingway, Faulkner, and Steinbeck. Yes, it was a literal book burning in the school's boiler. So the objection to Slaughterhouse-Five was profanity. The objection to Deliverance was homosexual content. And the last one, nobody seems sure. They're just kind of thinking it's because Severy picked it. Then Superintendent Dale Furman admitted that in retrospect that burning the books was a mistake. It would have been better just to store them. So, of course, the story leaked to the media. Parents petitioned the board to hire another English teacher, which they did. Most students transferred to that class, and Severy's contract was not renewed. In 1975, he settled a case against the Drake School Board, which awarded him $15,000 and stipulated that the books could be taught in the school. Author Kurt Vonnegut, who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five, wrote a private letter to the Drake School Board. And I recognize in this letter sentiments expressed by modern authors, so I'm going to share part of it. Dear Mr. McCarthy, I am writing to you in your capacity as chairman of the Drake School Board. I am among those American writers whose books have been destroyed in the now famous furnace of your school. Certain members of your community have suggested that my work is evil. This is extremely insulting to me. The news from Drake indicates to me that books and writers are very unreal to you people. I am writing this letter to let you know how real I am. I want you to know, too, that my publisher and I have done absolutely nothing to exploit this disgusting news from Drake. We are not clapping each other on the back, crowing about all the books we will sell because of the news. We have declined to go on television, have written no fiery letters to editorial pages, have granted no lengthy interviews. We are angered and sickened and saddened. And no copies of this letter have been sent to anybody else. You now hold the only copy in your hands. It is a strictly private letter from me to the people of Drake, who've done so much to damage my reputation in the eyes of their children and then in the eyes of the world. Do you have the courage and ordinary decency to show this letter to the people, or will it, too, be consigned to the fires of your furnace? So I'm unclear how the letter did become public, but it's a good one. And sadly, it's not the past. The present-day Drake School and public libraries still do not have these books on their shelves. And let's be real, good teachers and librarians are still being hurt because they're doing their job. Exposing people to new ideas and teaching them to think for themselves. September 1st, 2022 NPR article talks about Oklahoma Secretary of Education Ryan Walters, who's using the power of his office to call on the State Board of Education to revoke the teaching certificate of Summer Boisnier of Norman High School. She put paper over her classroom bookshelves with the message, "Books the state doesn't want you to read." This was in response to House Bill 1775, a state law, because it was passed, that restricts what public school educators can say about race and gender. She also posted a QR code for the Brooklyn Public Library's Books Untamed project, which gives young kids access to books that may be banned in their schools. In his letter, Walter suggested that she gave students access to banned and pornographic material. Also, there's no place for a teacher with a liberal political agenda in the classroom, and officials must ensure she doesn't go to another district and do the same thing. She ended up resigning from her position because she did not feel she would be able to be a good teacher with all these restrictions. Of course, she was only risking her teaching license and her career. Florida's, what some call the Stop Woke Act, requires all books to be vetted by a trained media specialist and has legal consequences. Manatee County Social Studies teacher Dan Falls spoke on this act. He's part of a lawsuit against the bill on First Amendment grounds. He points out that woke indoctrination does not exist on any scale, especially in Florida. But it's convenient for campaigning. And only government-approved books are allowed in classrooms. Violation is a third-degree felony. Going off the government-approved list is a fine, punishable by up to 5 years in jail and a $5,000 fine. And that is incredibly demoralizing for teachers, and it's this kind of politics is among the causes blamed for teacher shortages in places like South Dakota. And real people are hurt. I opened last week's video, like I said earlier, with a librarian who's horrified by how her town was treating her in the library. The full story is even worse. The library is shutting down, and book banners have successfully defunded it. The Patmos Library in Jamestown, Michigan was Shavala Yimker's refuge for years. They were homeschooled, no internet. And the library was their only access to books outside the home. But local conservatives followed a national fad to remove Maya Kobabe's Genderqueer from the shelves. It follows Kobabe's journey to figure out their own gender identity. Local residents began putting up signs about how tax money would be used to groom kids. Library millage was voted down by 25%, and it will stop receiving funding in fall 2024. Despite some outside donations from 3 people that are sympathetic to the right wing, just started terms on the library board. And just for fun, remember those outside donations? Well, Shane Trejo, a Michigan GOP official who doesn't live near Jamestown, posted, "Time to shut down the library by force, and then perhaps charge the people writing these checks as accessories for child abuse." One day, the library closed early due to threats, which is kind of the background of that video I showed last week. Local residents accused the library of lying about the threats. Several library staff resigned in the face of the hate. Meanwhile, Jamestown conservatives pretended, pray that we can make changes and make the Patmos Library a safe and neutral place for our children. And meanwhile, a sign across the street read, 50% increase to groom our kids? Vote no on library. So North Dakota actually handled this marginally better. The book Genderqueer ended up on the shelves of the Dickinson Public Library, the city nearest where I live. It's not perfect, but I'm happy to report it's still on the shelves. And while parents now have the option of limiting the books their children can check out, they can't limit it for everybody. The main point is that this is anti-freedom. We could anti-knowledge. We could play the game of finding examples left and right, but I think a more important idea is that limiting knowledge and ideas is dangerous. And what's being forgotten is that there is already a process for removing books from libraries. It's an onerous process by design. We don't want a few loud voices whipped into the outrage of the moment dictating what books should be taken off. And describing these books as pornography is pure hyperbole. The word is a little tricky to define, but it is a very loaded word, And the same with calling librarians and teachers names like groomer or pedophile. It devalues these terms so that they no longer have their power and ruins lives. So using these terms because you don't like a book is just plain wrong. And I haven't talked much yet about the racial reasons some books are being removed. So next week I want to talk about some of the other books being removed, the process of removing books that exists now, and I want to talk about why access to knowledge and reading these books is important. So expect more, and it'll get us closer to the really, I promise, really good scenery that is coming. So thank you for watching. We'll talk to you later.